Good morning, Pastor Rob. How's everybody this morning? As most of you know, back in the early 90s, I served in the Army Rangers. I was a medic of a 2nd Ranger Battalion at Fort Lewis. And I still keep in touch with a lot of my Ranger brothers, even from way back in the 90s. And still currently a chaplain in one of the small groups here, the motorcycle clubs for former Rangers. And this morning, one of the guys sent a picture to the Brotherhood. It's a group we have online, showing that one of the rounds that they bought had gone through like a half inch of steel. As a pastor, you look at that and think that's a neat illustration. A bullet round going through about a half inch of armor, half inch of steel, and then asking everybody, has anybody tried this round? Pretty amazing how it penetrates that metal. And so I kept that image in the back of my mind as I was reading my devotions this morning, Acts chapter 23 on through the end of Acts, about how Paul had been arrested for preaching the gospel and how he had been shipwrecked and he was on the island of Malta and got bit by a viper. And I was just thinking how through those times Paul still preached the gospel. He preached the gospel when he was being tried before Agrippa and Festus. He preached the gospel when the Jews incarcerated him inappropriately or wrongly incarcerated him. He preached the gospel when he was a prisoner on a ship. He preached the gospel when he was shipwrecked, and he ministered to those people on the island of Malta where he was shipwrecked, even after being bit by a snake, a viper that should have killed him. And then he preaches from Rome while on house arrest, and that's the one that I really thought about. Here we are, still in the COVID, and Kentucky just took a step backwards for COVID precautions. But I was just thinking of Paul, and I was thinking of that bullet at the same time. Paul preached for 2 years on house arrest in Rome, to where he says in Philippians that the whole staff at Caesar's household knew that his chains were because of the gospel. His chains were because of the name of Christ. And so then thinking about that bullet, I said there's no situation basically that the gospel cannot penetrate. No matter what situation you're in, if you still cling to Christ, still preach the gospel, no matter where you're at, there's no situation like that bullet that I saw this morning on that illustration, where the gospel cannot penetrate the situation and make a difference. And so in 2 Timothy, I believe it is, Paul says, I may be chained, but the gospel is not chained. We may be under restrictions, but the gospel is not under restrictions. We can still preach the gospel. And so that was just my thought today. Just all those things that Paul did, all the times he could have complained, threw up his arms, says God doesn't love me, or complain about the situation. But in every situation he was in, all he worried about was glorifying Jesus Christ. So if we're in a situation and we're on house arrest right now, I guess, so we can still preach the gospel through technology. We can still call friends. We can still text one another and encourage one another. And so just like, again, the bullet that I saw in the Ranger Forum this morning that penetrated about a half inch of steel, the gospel can penetrate any situation we're in. We can preach it, we can present it, we can talk about it. Even in tough times, we can have a smile on our face and glorify God in these tough times. So anyway, if you want to get inspired this morning, read Acts chapter 23 on about Paul's arrest, being persecuted for preaching the gospel, and how many times his life was to be taken by the Jews and by certain people. Certainly spending 2 years in prison, in a maritime prison, would be difficult in the chains that he was in, but he still preached the gospel. He still was able to produce converts for Jesus Christ until it was so evident. His testimony was so powerful. The gospel penetrated so deeply that everybody knew that Paul was a man of God and wrongly incarcerated for preaching the gospel. So that's my thought for today. And then again, for 2 years under house arrest, Paul still preached the gospel. So we can still do that. Whatever situation you're in, remember the gospel can penetrate it. The gospel can come in and make a difference. And we can still be a light in dark times. So I hope everybody has a great day, and I'll see you all tomorrow.